A political leader is a person who claims to know what to do and where to go. The leader is saying to us, I know the solutions to our social problems. Follow me. I will lead you in the right direction. If he is wrong and he leads us off a cliff, it is our neck that will break. Thus, it behooves us to examine his claim. Let's find out if our leaders actually know what they're talking about. You're going to see political leaders full of absurd conclusions and contradictions. Worse, they are either unwilling or unable to reason. And when they are required to reason about their conclusions, they get angry, insult, threaten, and even attack. Could you explain to the viewers that,
look, Jan,
to me at the same time, how it is that we become more wealthy by incurring in $2 or $3 trillion debts?
Jan, I think
this year.
I think this interview's come to an end. Someday, when you shut up and you want to talk about something, let's talk.
Well, let's change the subject. No, let's just change the subject.
We're done.
Let's talk
Get
about
out of here.
Let's just change the subject. We can talk about something else.
Listen, you get the fuck out of here. I'll throw you out the window. Out.
Can people like this find the solutions to our problems? Congressman Pete Stark thinks that the larger the national debt, the wealthier we are.
So the idea that the national debt makes any difference is preposterous.
But you don't think that what the national debt is important? Doesn't that mean that the larger the national debt, don't we have to pay more interest?
The wealthier we are.
The larger the national debt, the wealthier we are?
It's an indication of the wealth of the country, you're right.
So the more you owe, the more you're worth?
In federal account, in the national scheme of things, that's quite right.
So why shouldn't we borrow another trillion then next year?
Probably
so we can become wealthy.
If we should not necessarily borrow another trillion, but we will.
No wonder our national debt is skyrocketing. Some congressmen think our enormous debt is making us wealthier. Senator Harry Reid thinks we are not forced to pay taxes. He thinks taxes are voluntary. Watch. If the government is in the business of forcefully taking money from some people in order to provide welfare benefits to others, how will the people whose money is being taken feel about the government?
Well, I don't accept your phraseology. I don't think we force people.
Taxation is not forceful?
Well, no.
It's voluntary?
In fact, quite to the contrary. Our system of government is a voluntary tax system.
Oh, if you don't want to pay your taxes, you don't have to?
Oh, of course you have to pay your taxes. But
well, the government will force you to pay, or they'll fine you or imprison you.
We have a voluntary system. The fact of the matter is that if when you pay your taxes, see, in many other countries it's not voluntary. For example, in many countries, the government makes sure that your employer takes out every penny. Many countries don't file income tax returns.
We have withholding here too, don't we?
Pardon me?
Withholding?
With some programs, yes. But I'm talking about in some countries, European countries as an example, you don't file an income tax return. There is no need to, because your employer takes all the money out. That's the difference between a voluntary and an involuntary system. You can't cheat and not pay your taxes. Right. But I don't accept your phraseology that you forcibly take money from somebody else and give it to
Can the taxpayer decide not to pay his taxes if he wants?
He can not pay his taxes if he wants.
What will happen?
He's subject to civil and criminal penalties.
They'll put him in jail. They use force against him. He pays. Everybody pays taxes under threat of jail or fine, under threat of force. In other words, you are forced to pay your taxes, whether you fill out your form voluntarily or whether it's withheld by your employer. You don't have a choice on whether you can pay taxes that are going to be used for welfare programs. You can't make that choice.
Well, but the reason our system is called a voluntary tax system, and I recognize, that ultimately you can't cheat in your taxes, but we have many provisions in the law they don't have in most countries. We have deductibility for home, interest on mortgage payment. They don't have that in most countries. We have deductibility for certain excessive expenses as it relates to health, doctors, hospitals. We have all kinds of tax, some people call them loopholes, but others would call them incentives for people to do business. And that's why you're not forced to pay certain taxes. There are ways, if you decide to buy a home.
You can decide not to pay taxes in the United States?
I mean, I really don't understand what you're trying to get at. What the point of the matter is...
Because you objected to my phraseology. You said that, you say that the government isn't forcefully taking money from some people to provide welfare benefits to others. And in fact, that's what it's doing, because all taxation is forceful. It's backed up by physical force. If you don't pay your taxes, the government will intervene with you forcefully. So you don't have a choice. It's not voluntary. You can't decide not to pay and not suffer a consequence. If you don't pay, you'll go to jail.
Well,
so you're forced to pay.
You don't go to jail. Some people go to jail. There are all kinds of civil penalties. If you don't pay your taxes, you pay interest and you pay penalties. The fact of the matter is, our system is a voluntary system.
Maybe this explains why he is not reluctant to raise our taxes. Senator Reid isn't the only one who thinks taxes are voluntary. Congressman Hoffel agrees.
Because people aren't forced to pay taxes.
Some congressmen will not be persuaded, but instead will make preposterous arguments in defense of a mistaken position. For instance, when Congressman Tucker tried to defend the exclusion of white congressmen from the Congressional Black Caucus, he found himself arguing that the Ku Klux Klan was not racist.
Oh, you don't agree with that?
Secondly,
Oh, you should have said so.
No. I said, as a general proposition, that's what it is. Secondly, you should remember when I talk, because I did say that as it relates to private organizations, that you cannot analogize that necessarily with employment situations, because everybody knows that people have a right of freedom of association. If the Black Caucus, or even if just some members of black people,
White supremacists can get together if they want.
They didn't get together and have the KKKs. Is that racism?
Yes, it is.
Want me to come in? Oh, come on. And then the other thing I think, Jan, I wouldn't give a care. They can have their KKK meetings.
I don't care either, but it's racist.
How about Governor Bill Richardson, who thinks you can delegate a right you do not have?
If they don't have that right to initiate force, can they have properly delegated it to the government?
Well, if they choose to do that, sure.
Can you properly delegate a right that you do not have?
You mean, can you donate property to the government?
No. You've agreed that the citizens don't have the right to initiate force against other citizens.
Right.
Can they, I ask you if they don't have that right, can they properly delegate it to the government? You have said yes. So now I'm asking you whether you can delegate a right that you do not have. Can you properly delegate a right that you do not have? Does that make sense?
I believe under the Constitution, a citizen must obey the laws of their government and their constitutional authority.
But so you think that you can delegate a right that you do not have?
Basically, yes.
Well, I don't have the right to use your home, right? Without your permission.
That's right.
Can I delegate it to my brother or to somebody else?
It's your individual choice.
I could delegate the right to use your home to somebody else? Does that make sense?
If you have a consensual agreement with that other person, it's that right.
Your home, I don't have a right to use your home, right? Can I delegate that right to somebody else if I don't have it? Don't you have to have the right in order to give it to somebody else?
You can't delegate the use of my home.
Right. So you cannot properly delegate a right that you do not have. You have to have it in order to delegate it. Is that not correct?
I have to go. I gotta go.
Our whole legal system is based on the principle that you cannot delegate rights you do not have. If this principle is removed, the whole legal system would collapse. Senator Inouye goes further. He thinks that armed robbers can properly attack other citizens if they are authorized to do so by the government.
Let me see if I understand your position. Basically, would you say that it's wrong for the citizens to initiate physical force against other citizens like an armed robber does?
Unless we permit
but
that
it's
by
okay
law.
It's okay for the government to do so.
Because the government has been authorized by the people.
Okay, but if the government authorized armed robbers to do it, it would be okay?
If the government is that foolish to do so, I don't know what kind of country that would be, but that's legal, and if it's constitutional, so be it.
He also agrees with Richardson that you can properly delegate a right you do not have.
Do the individual citizens have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that have not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody and haven't violated anybody's property rights?
They cannot do that because they are not authorized to do so under the
Right.
law.
So individual citizens don't have that right. If they don't have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens, could they have properly delegated that right to the government?
Oh yes, they do so right now.
Can you properly delegate a right that you do not have?
Do you think Senator Bernie Sanders agrees with Senator Inouye and Governor Bill Richardson that you can properly delegate a right you do not have?
Did the individual citizens ever have the right to initiate physical force against other individual citizens?
I would expect that would be against the law. People do not have the right to go around beating up
That
innocent
would be
people.
wrong, right?
That would be
Okay,
wrong.
so if they never had that right, could they have delegated it to the government?
I guess they have.
If you could properly delegate rights you do not have, all private property would be obliterated because you could dispose of other people's property. So why do all these politicians make this preposterous claim? Are they just ignorant, or do they have an agenda? When Congressman McDermott goes to choose his friends, he prefers people that would forcefully violate his rights if the majority agreed.
When you choose your friends,
Oh, I see, my friends.
yes, your friends and your business associates, well, would you like to surround yourself with people that will always respect your rights and would never forcefully extract money from you, or would you prefer to deal with people that if the majority thought it was okay, would forcefully extract money from you?
I'd choose the second.
You choose the second.
Yes.
People that if the majority thought it was okay,
Yep.
would forcefully extract money from you.
Right.
Well, you're very consistent because that's the kind of government that you prefer.
You probably have your own favorite example of an absurd statement by a politician, so we won't go on with these whoppers. We are going to show you some explosive interviews, but first, let's see some of their contradictions.
Is Congresswoman Collins contradicting herself on whether the Congressional Black Caucus racially discriminates against white congressmen and on whether it is bad to racially discriminate? Can a white congressman become a voting member of the Congressional Black Caucus?
Not to my knowledge.
He cannot, right? So aren't they using race to evaluate this person's merits of entry into that organization? Well, don't you think that that's a racially discriminatory practice?
No.
Aren't they discriminating based
No.
on race?
No, no.
Well, what are they discriminating based on?
Race is part of it. Yes, they are racially discriminating.
Oh, so they are discriminating. It is racial discrimination, because before you said it wasn't.
But you asked me, was it bad? It's
Oh.
not racist
Oh, so,
discrimination.
okay, so it's racial discrimination, but it's good.
It's racial discrimination, and it is. It exists.
Yes, but do you think it's good to racially discriminate
I think
against the
that-
white congressman?
I think that the Black Caucus should discriminate even against Republicans, African Americans. I think that.
But there are
I think
Republican
that
African Americans in the Congressional Black Caucus,
at
right?
this point in time, there is one
But
in the whole country.
okay, but then, so the basis for that organization is race. So if you don't have that race, you're discriminated against. That's why white congressmen can't become a member. So that is
But they are members.
racial discrimination.
But they are members. They are
But not
sustained.
voting members.
That's right.
So they're not full members, so they can't vote. So they are discriminating against them based on their race.
Okay.
But you think that that's good? Oh, first you said you thought it was bad.
I think it's necessary.
It's necessary. So is it a necessary evil?
I don't think it's an evil. I think it's an evil that you have to have black caucuses. I think it's an evil that you have to have affirmative action. I think it's evil that you have to have a discussion on racism. I think it's evil that you sit here and don't seem to understand what racism is and what redress is. I think it's evil that you can sit here and act as though you were not very intelligent when I talk about racism today. That's what I think is evil, and that's what I think is wrong with America today. The fact that you can go into a courtroom and have blacks treated one way and whites treated another way and have a judge say, I'm not racist. And the
That's
fact for
wrong,
you,
right?
and the
But
fact,
if
the fact for you,
but
you would sit
if
there and
if
say,
a black person discriminates against a white person based on race, that's not bad.
oh, yes, it is.
Well,
And-
before you
and
said
that-
it wasn't bad.
These contradictions are the cause of institutionalized racism. Congressman Barney Frank doesn't pay his interns minimum wage because he says they are free to come and go as they please. But then he has to admit that they aren't free to come and go as they please.
Anything they undertake to do is entirely voluntary. They do not have to show up at a certain time. If they want to leave the office at a certain time, they leave. If they don't want to come in for 3 or 4 days, they're free to do that. They do this because it's an educational experience. And the notion that parking cars as a valet or working in McDonald's or working in a dry cleaning shop is the same as on a purely voluntary basis, participating in a congressional office, learning about it, doing what you basically want to do, that those are similar, I think, frankly, is not serious conversation.
Excuse me, but I was informed by your office that in order to be an intern here, you have to make a commitment to work at least 3 days. I think you should check with your staff to see if that is a requirement in order to be an intern here.
Yes, 3 days.
If you can apply minimum wage laws to others but not to yourself, you will be more likely to favor minimum wage laws. House Majority Whip Congressman James Clyburn denies having said what you just heard him say.
If you use race as a factor to evaluate somebody's skills, their merits, or their character, instead of focusing strictly on their actions, that would be racial discrimination.
That's true. Absolutely.
Previously, I had asked you if you thought that if you use race as a factor to evaluate another person's skills, merits, or character, that would be racial discrimination.
No, you used the word solely. Solely. Go back and check what you said. You said, if it's the sole reason, irrespective of their merits. And I said yes. Now,
sorry,
you're talking
Congressman, but we could, if you want, we could play it back for you. You could see that I just used, if you use race as a factor.
As I said, if you raise it as a factor, it's legal and constitutional. If you use it as the factor, it is not legal and it's not constitutional. Now, you're talking to somebody who's been doing this stuff for 30 years.
If you use race as a factor to evaluate somebody's skills, their merits, or their character, instead of focusing strictly on their actions, that would be racial discrimination.
That's true. Absolutely.
Can you live well in a society where other people can legally gang up on you and forcefully extract money from you?
I don't think, I can't imagine living in a society like that.
However, he thinks that if other people use the government to forcefully extract money from you, then you can live well.
Should the government do what it is supposed to prevent?
You got some question there I don't understand.
Okay, well, you had agreed that the government should prevent people from forcefully extracting money from others. But as I understand it, you think that the government should do that very same thing. It should forcefully take money from some through taxes in order to provide goods and services for others. So my question is, should the government do what it is supposed to prevent?
I have a little trouble with it. It sounds like you think taxation is forcefully extracting from people their money.
Once again, they try to avoid the contradiction by claiming that people are not forced to pay taxes.
Earlier, I had asked you whether it's possible to live well in a society where other people can legally extract money from you forcefully. And you had answered that you could not live well in such a society. But
I thought you were talking about armed robbery.
Yeah, I
now
understand.
you're really talking about taxes.
Right. I'm talking about using the government to do the same thing.
But your definition of taxation is forcefully extracting.
Well, we agreed that taxes are not voluntary contributions. Therefore,
they are not.
Congressman Hoffel contradicts himself on whether taxes are voluntary contributions.
The notion that taxes are forcibly extracting money from people.
You agree they're not, but you agree that they're not voluntary. But you agree that they're not voluntary contributions, right?
Well, no.
You think they are voluntary contributions?
What I'm saying is that under a democracy where people elect a government and they consent to the rule of law, that you may not like all the laws, and you have an opportunity to change those laws, but you agree to live under the rules of society.
So you think they are voluntary contributions?
Yes.
taxes. So if you don't pay them, will the government force you to pay them or not?
Yes, of course.
So then they're not voluntary contributions?
If you break...
Senator Gordon Smith contradicts himself on whether all taxes are redistributive. First he says they are, and then he admits they aren't.
I'm talking about redistributive taxes. I'm talking about taxing somebody to provide a service.
All taxes are redistributive in one way or another.
Even those that are used for national defense? Isn't that provided to everyone?
Yeah, the military-industrial complex.
But doesn't everybody enjoy...
We're going to wrap this up, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be with you.
Well, it's too bad that you couldn't answer a few more questions.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Getting interesting.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Not all taxes are redistributive, no.
If you don't distinguish between redistributive taxes and other taxes, you will be more likely to favor redistributive taxes. During the presidential debates, President Bush ridiculed the idea that we use troops for nation building.
So I don't think our troops ought to be used for what's called nation building. I think what we need to do is convince people who live in the lands they live in to build the nations. Maybe I'm missing something here. I mean, we're going to have kind of a nation-building corps from America? Absolutely not.
Then, in the State of the Union address, he totally endorsed the idea of using troops for nation building.
I have a message for the brave and oppressed people of Iraq. Your enemy is not surrounding your country. Your enemy is ruling your country. And the day he and his regime are removed from power will be the day of your liberation. We exercise power without conquest, and we sacrifice for the liberty of strangers.
President Bush spent the next 6 years nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan.
The president never explained why he had been mistaken when, as a presidential candidate, he had argued against nation building and had mocked the idea of a nation-building corps of America.
President Obama hasn't been any better. First he opposed the war in Iraq, and then he waged war in Iraq as well as expanding the war and nation-building in Afghanistan. Why do politicians make these outrageous statements and contradict themselves so often? Besides the power lust that could be blinding them, are there any other causes that explain why they can't think straight?
If a person really does not want to know the truth and is therefore unwilling to answer questions responsively because they're trying to evade facts, they will come to mistaken conclusions. Typically, evasion is exemplified by politicians dodging questions and really never answering what is being asked.
Senator Bernie Sanders will not answer a question because he claims he already answered it. But then he admits he doesn't even know what the question was. How could he have answered the question if he didn't even know what it was? Finally, he answers the question but terminates the interview when he doesn't like where it's going.
Is all legitimate governmental power derived from the people?
Yep.
Did the individual citizens ever have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that had not initiated or threatened to initiate physical force?
All right. You keep making this point. I don't know what your political background is or what the political background of this. Let me finish, please.
Could you just answer that question?
I'm happy to answer the question.
Okay.
And I don't know really where you are coming from politically, but you keep coming back to the point, I presume, that every law that is passed by the federal government, state government, or local government is some kind of forceful attack on innocent people. I happen not to think so.
What was my question?
I answered your question.
My question was whether the individuals ever had the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that have not initiated or threatened to initiate physical force.
You seem to
think... Do you think they did or they didn't?
I think your question...
You haven't answered either yes or no.
Frankly, I think your question is absurd.
Well,
fine. But the
viewers would like to know what you think about it.
I'm giving you the answer for the fourth time. The basic premise of your question is that all acts of government, every law that is being passed, somehow implies physical force against innocent people.
No, I haven't said that. I have not said that. That has nothing to do with the question that I asked. All I've asked you is whether the individual citizens ever had the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that have not initiated or threatened to initiate physical force.
I've answered your question 5 times. Frankly,
Well,
I
is it
think
a
it's-
yes or no?
It's an absurd. In this country, if people do not like what their towns are doing, their city government, their state government, their federal government, they unelect people. That's what freedom is about. What
Why
that
are you
has to-
unwilling to answer that question?
It's an absurd question. You are implying
Fine,
that every
but that's
act...
what people want to know. What you
No one has ever asked me that question. I
Right.
must tell you. If your implication is that every piece of... Right now, as we speak, on the floor of the Congress, there is a discussion about a law. You can interpret that after that law is passed, if people choose not to obey it, they will be punished.
Is it not possible for you simply to answer the question?
I've asked you answer that question as best I can.
Well, I have no idea whether it's a yes or a no. What is it?
I've answered that question as best that I can. I think it's an absurd question, and you mischaracterize the function of
You just
government.
refuse to answer that question.
No, I've answered it in 5 different ways. Let me ask you the question. Maybe help me clarify.
Okay,
Help me clarify
fine.
the question.
Sure.
Because I'm not quite sure where you're coming from. Is it your suggestion that every law that is passed by a city, state, or federal government implies an act of force against innocent people?
No. That's not my suggestion.
That's not
now
your
can you
suggestion.
answer the question
Well,
of
then you
whether...
rephrase it, yes.
The question is, did the individual citizens ever have the right to initiate physical force against other individual citizens?
I would expect that would be against the law. People do not have the right to go around beating up
That
innocent
would be
people.
wrong, right?
That would be
Okay,
wrong.
So if they never had that right, could they have delegated it to the government?
I guess they have. They have delegated the right of governments to make war. They have delegated the right of governments to build roads. They have delegated all types of rights to people. And in a civilized society, as you know, we have laws, we have judges, we have courts, we have appeal processes, and when people break the law, they are punished.
Can you delegate a right that you don't have?
I believe the American people have the right, in a representative democracy, to delegate power to their elected officials to do best for cities, states, and the federal government. So I guess the answer is yes.
But didn't you say before
Okay,
that they
you're
didn't have the right to do that?
Excuse me. Okay, I've got to get going. Thank you very much. What is your background? Well, I've got to go vote right now.
Okay, I understand that you have to go vote.
Can you just ask me a question while we're on the camera?
Can we get to the bottom line?
No,
then?
I think
Let's just get to the bottom line and wrap it up so that we can finish this show. And
well, I think
you can
we've
go
finished
vote.
the show, and I must confess that your questioning is interesting. I've enjoyed the discussion. Not quite sure where you are coming from, but I've tried my best to answer your questions, and I thank you very much for
I'm trying to...
well, I've got to vote, as you can
okay.
say.
I was just
One of the
trying to-
obligations of being a representative is to vote, to try to represent the people as best we can. And I got an important vote. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for the interview, Congressman.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for watching.
I would like some more information as to exactly where the show is going to come, where it's, who you are, where you're coming from. I think you gave me about the origin of the show. I would like to know, leave me your card because I would like some very specific information about who you are,
Fine.
who finances the show, and where it goes.
Okay. Would you like to do the show on minimum wage?
No.
Sometimes when the question really gets to them, they become aggressive and try to evade by attacking the question or the questioner. Here's a good example of escalating invective in a desperate attempt to avoid answering questions.
Do you have a principle that you can use to determine when we should invade another country and when we should not?
The problem is that you're trying to reduce this to single litmus paper tests, and that's not the way any reasonable person makes decisions about national security or foreign policy issues.
Okay, well, let me ask you this.
Basically your approach is extremely simple-minded, if I may say so.
I was just trying to see if there was a general principle, but apparently you don't have one that you say is a litmus test that you can use to differentiate when you should invade another country and when you should not.
You know, you really are one of the worst interviewers I've ever dealt with.
And how am I? How's that? Because I'm asking for a general principle, and that is simplistic.
Because you have an extraordinarily simplistic, single-minded view of the way that foreign policy ought to be conducted.
I just asked you if you had a principle. You could say, no, I don't have one.
I'm not going to say that I have no principle. You know, I've probably had 150 interviews in the last year, and you're the worst interviewer that I've been with.
In what sense? Why have my questions been unfair to you?
No, they're not unfair. They're just sort of stupid.
Why are they stupid?
Because you're asking for
a principle. I want to understand a principle that would permit people to know when we should. A principle, we've defined what a principle is. A general rule that you can use to know when you should do something and when you shouldn't do something. That gives you intellectual guidance.
You believe that principle is litmus paper tests. I have explained to you the several principles that are important, and I'm afraid now I'm going to have to go to my other appointment. It was very nice to be with you.
You can't answer the other questions we have? Excuse me, sir. You're taking the microphone with you. Watch Congressman Hayworth's press secretary jump in front of the camera to prevent any further questions. Well, let me ask you this. I just have a couple of minutes. Excuse me.
That is the last word.
I can't ask you.
Thanks, Jan. I'm glad to have you in. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You find it intellectually stimulating?
I found it very interesting, and I thank you for the chance to come by and visit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming. Fellas, thank you very much for coming by.
Congressman Henry Hyde's excuse for stealing the release and running away is contradicted by his earlier statements.
I'm happy to answer questions about my personal life. No, let's exhaust this subject.
Okay.
Let's take this one to the bitter end.
Okay. In this interview, he said that human beings should follow a moral principle consistently, and we've identified one of his moral principles, and he's accepted that he doesn't follow it consistently. And I gave him a chance to think about that, and I like his response.
Let me tell you something, Jan. This is turning into an argumentative interview. You don't want to talk about principles. You're talking about my personal life and whether I adhere to principles that I believe in. I don't think that's any of your business, and I think this interview is over, okay?
Well, you don't think that it's good to have rational discussions about your fundamental conclusions?
And I'd like to see that release. There it is. Yeah.
Well...
Goodbye.
Excuse me, sir, but you've taken my property.
Finally, in some instances, not only will they insult, but they will threaten and attack. Let's start with a veiled threat by the former Speaker of the House.
No, I think you've evaded the questions that I've asked by making speech about other things. Let me give you what I think is the bottom line.
Please,
let me give you what I think is the bottom line.
Half an hour is up.
You refuse to answer the questions. I just want to tell you what I think is the bottom line.
You know, you really made a mistake. You really made a mistake. You made a mistake.
Why did I make a mistake? What is a mistake?
Because I think that if you wanted to have a discussion about the minimum wage, you would have asked your questions. We would have moved to other aspects of it.
Let's discuss it.
But you asked one question through it. I don't have any more time. That's it. My time is up.
You think that it would harm you to answer my questions?
This interview is over. Would you please dismantle your cameras?
Excuse me. Do you think it would harm you?
Terry?
You think it would harm you to answer my questions?
Terry, will you call the guard because this interview is over? Okay?
You're going to call the guard on us?
No, I'm just telling you, it's over now. You either accept the fact that the interview is over or not. Okay? The interview is over.
You don't want to answer the questions.
No.
Let's see what happened when I asked Congressman Stark to explain how we become wealthier by incurring $2 or $3 trillion in debt this year.
I'd like to get back to what you said before. So you think that if the national debt increases, we become wealthier. So I don't see why you don't want to go for it. So,
and I'm not going to take the trouble to educate you here.
Could you explain to the viewers that,
look, Jan,
to me at the same time how it is that we become more wealthy by incurring in $2 or $3 trillion debts?
Jan, I think this interview's come to an end. Someday, when you shut up and you want to talk about something, let's talk about it.
Well, let's change the subject. No, let's just change the subject.
We're done.
Let's talk about
Get out of here.
Let's just change the subject. We can talk about something else.
Listen, you get the fuck out of here. I'll throw you out the window. Out.
Will some congressmen steal the tape and try to steal the signed guest release
in order to prevent their contradictions from seeing the light of day? Well, do you think that all legitimate governmental power is derived from the people?
I believe that, yes.
Okay. Do individual citizens have the right to initiate physical force against other individual citizens that haven't initiated force or violated anybody's rights?
Other citizens, other individuals have to act according to their moralistic, their religious, and their other positions. I don't know why you asked me the question.
Individual citizens have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that have not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody, haven't violated anybody's rights, and are in their sound mind. Is that what you think?
I don't understand your question.
You're not making any sense.
Excuse me.
This is a waste of time.
Excuse me.
This is a waste
Apparently,
of time.
the press secretary, Roddy Young, wants to participate in this interview.
No, this is a really.
And we would gladly interview him if he liked.
No, it's,
But
your questions are inane.
well, that's another insult. But what we're trying to do is investigate the political theory. Okay, why don't we do this? If you would like to be interviewed, I would gladly interview you on your viewpoint. But at the moment, I'm interviewing the congressman.
His time on about physical force.
You think it's a waste of time to know what he thinks the relationship is between the people and the government? Whether all legitimate governmental power is derived from the people?
You're not saying anything about anything that
Whether
actually
it's,
happened. What are you talking
you think that that's wrong? Okay, well, maybe let's discuss that if you like, but let me finish the interview with the congressman.
No, I think we pretty well concluded it because this is a
Well, didn't you say it was
circular
good?
argument.
Well, didn't you say it was good to have rational discussions on federal budgetary policy?
I can't have a rational discussion
Well,
with you.
in what sense have I been irrational?
Because you've been, as my colleague up here said, inane. You keep repeating the same question. I've answered it to you.
This is not the same question. I'm asking you your viewpoint about what you think
and I gave you an
relationships between individuals in this society should be, whether they have a right to initiate force against other individuals.
I gave you an answer.
You think that they do?
I gave you an answer.
You said that if they thought that they did, if their religious beliefs permitted it, then it was okay. I'm just trying to confirm that you actually believe that.
You asked me, do I have a right to I answered your question. I don't know why you keep going back at it.
Okay, so it's your viewpoint. What is the difference between a criminal and a decent, responsible citizen?
You don't know?
Well, isn't it that a criminal is willing to initiate physical force against somebody who has not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody, and a decent, responsible criminal, a decent, responsible citizen would not do that?
If you had someone breaking into your house...
Are you going to terminate this interview?
I'm taking the microphone off, and am I terminating the interview? Yes.
Excuse me.
You're ridiculous. That's the worst interview I've ever seen. You're not. You have no substance whatsoever. I'm appalled by your questions. You're wasting my time. You're wasting his time. You're going round in circles.
You have taken our property.
I have not taken anybody's property.
You took the tape.
I don't think so.
Yes, you did. Did he take the tape? He took it. Why did you take the tape?
That's his
that is no, it isn't. That's my property. That's a violation. That's a criminal action.
Well,
he's stealing my property.
That was the subject we were talking about.
Right. We were talking about that. We were talking about whether it's right to initiate physical force against somebody who hasn't initiated force against anybody. This is a good example. He apparently believes that it's okay to initiate force, to take money or to take tapes or property forcefully from somebody.
I think he's doing what I interpret here. You came here and you violated the respect that we gave you to have a rational interview.
How?
Well, by the kind of questioning and the lead questioning you were doing here. You were definitely trying to...
You think it's wrong for us to know what you think about these questions?
Well, you can do it.
Excuse me, Mr. Young, are you going to give us back that tape or are you going to steal it?
Tape.
You stole it.
I don't have it.
You took it. You took it to the other office. Are you going to bring it back or not?
I don't have it.
I think you should bring it back because that's a criminal violation.
Go, sue me. You're going to use physical force on me?
No, I'm going to use the law.
Okay, go for it.
You have our tape.
Well, listen.
End of interview. Thank you for your time.
Well, but we'll gladly leave, but please give us the tape.
Bottom line, jeez, no wonder I haven't seen it.
Would you please leave?
I'll certainly leave, sure. This interview is over.
You signed? I would like that back.
Excuse me. Don't take these things.
Until I get the police ticket. I want that
No,
document back.
you can't take my property.
You don't have a right to take property. You know, you have to respect the law.
Can people like this find the solutions to our problems? Why do they avoid answering my questions? What are they trying to hide?
In order to reason well on any subject, you need to identify principles that integrate the relevant facts and thus permit you to evaluate effectively. Our decision makers either don't have principles or their principles are contradictory. That's why they cannot reason effectively. If you're not looking for a principle because you're against principles in principle, you certainly won't find one.
Should we invade another country if their leader is an evil dictator with weapons of mass destruction who has violated the rights of his citizens and attacks its neighbors?
It's impossible to make a general distinction, I think, based on general characteristics.
If Woolsey is correct, and one should not make general distinctions based on general characteristics, then it is impossible to have a principle, because that's what a principle is, a general distinction based on general characteristics.
If you have a contradiction in your mind, you necessarily have a mistake in your thinking. For the record, here is a short list of the typical contradictions that are in the minds of our politicians. People aren't forced to pay taxes. Yes, they are. You can delegate rights you do not have. No, you can't. You can't live well if other people can legally gang up on you and take your money. Yes, you can. All taxes are redistributive. No, they aren't. The Congressional Black Caucus racially discriminates. No, it doesn't. People should be free to decide what wage they will accept. No, they shouldn't. Congresswoman Leslie Byrne thinks that contradictory statements are not a problem because, in her view, both contradictory statements can be true.
The question I was asking you is this: is it possible that there aren't any consumers that are willing to pay $100 an hour for a service, and at the same time that there are some that are willing to pay $100 an hour? Are those two statements possible?
I would
Can
say
they be true, both of them?
Certainly are true, and my response is, so what?
So it is true that consumers are willing to pay $100 an hour for a
Right.
service, and at the same time it's not true that there are any consumers that are willing to pay $100 an hour for a service.
Right.
So two contradictory propositions can both be true.
True.
So
And the question is, so what?
now,
What
so
does that have to do with minimum
you
wage?
think two contradictory propositions can both be true, right?
There are
So
people
it
who are
makes no
willing to pay
difference
and not
whether
pay.
it makes no difference whether you answer yes or no to a question.
Our political leaders don't even know what a government is, much less what it should or should not do.
Do they believe government was instituted so they can bestow benefits on special interest groups and the constituents that vote for them at the expense of the people that don't?
What kind of social institution is government anyway? Is it like a church or a university? Or is government the institution in charge of enacting and enforcing certain rules of behavior in any given society? Is all governmental action backed up by physical force and therefore essentially forceful? Let's see what happened when I asked Congresswoman Roybal Allard that question.
Is all governmental action backed up by physical force and therefore essentially forceful?
Is all government action backed up by physical force? For example?
Well, if you break a law, does the government intervene with you forcefully to make you comply with the law?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about driving beyond the speed limit and a police sees you, yes, they stop you and they give you a ticket.
Right.
If you're a drunk driver, government, in this case the police, stops you and you go to jail.
So all governmental action is backed up by physical force, and therefore it's essentially forceful. If you don't follow a law, the government will intervene with you personally or with your property.
Well,
right?
I don't know that giving you a ticket would be considered physical.
Well, they stop
force.
you if you resist and you don't want to pay attention to what the policeman says. Then he actually will intervene with you forcefully and make it.
Right?
Right?
And that's what the American public wants to have, that kind of security in knowing that people who break the law, who are doing things that are immoral, are in fact going to be dealt with.
Right. The government then intervenes with them forcefully.
Finally, she agrees that government action is forceful. However, later she will change her mind again and claim that governmental action is not forceful.
Well, my question is, should the government take action against somebody who has not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody, hasn't violated anybody's property rights, and is in their sound mind?
Should they take action against someone who has
not initiated force against anybody, hasn't violated anybody's property rights, and is in their sound mind?
And for what reason would the government take action against a person who hasn't done anything?
Well, do you think that it's always wrong for them to do that, or do you think it's okay for the government to initiate force against innocent citizens?
Well, I mean, you have to give me an example of someone who isn't doing anything and an action is being taken against them.
Well, I'm asking you what your view is as a question of principle. Do you think that that would be wrong for the government to initiate physical force against somebody who is innocent and hasn't done anything to anybody?
Well, I think you're going to have to define what innocent is. I mean,
well,
innocent
I did.
might
He
be
hasn't
from one...
He hasn't violated anybody's property rights, and he has not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody. That's what I mean by innocent.
And what kind of action would you be talking about?
Any action by the government, because all action is forceful.
Well, I don't necessarily agree in terms of your saying that all action is forceful.
8-term Congresswoman Jackson Lee, a former judge, doesn't know or doesn't want us to know that a law is a rule you are forced to follow by the government.
I don't see anywhere that the government is using physical force on the American people.
The government doesn't enforce laws?
Yeah, they're legitimate laws. That's not physical force.
How does the government enforce a law if it isn't by force?
Well, first of all, the government doesn't need to enforce the laws by force because people consent to the laws. Most Americans are law-abiding in all
Right, but if you violate a law, the government will use force to make you follow the law. Is that not true?
Well, if it is a law that infringes upon the rights of other individuals, the American people will ask for law enforcement to be in place in the way that they should be in place.
So the government does use force.
That's
why they call it enforcement, because it's using force, right? You already heard Senator Harry Reid and Congressman Hoffel argue that people aren't forced to pay taxes. They claim that taxes are voluntary. Believe me, there are plenty more politicians who try to deny that people are forced by the government to follow the law. Why do they need to deny this obvious fact? They are trying to hide the fact that the government is forcefully redistributing the citizens' wealth.
They refuse to accept that forcefully taking money from some citizens in order to provide goods and services for others constitutes an initiation of physical force. It is one thing to tax a citizen for a service that he uses and needs, such as police protection, and it is quite another to tax him to provide a service for someone else, such as in the case of welfare, corporate subsidies, and Medicaid. All governmental action is forceful. The difference between a good government and a bad government is the principle that they use to determine whether or not to take action against a citizen. Do they believe that action should only be taken against criminals that use force or fraud to deprive other people of their bodily integrity, their property, or the free exercise of their judgment? Or on the other hand, do they believe that it is morally correct to initiate physical force against other people who have not violated anybody's rights?
The initiation of physical force against peaceful citizens is morally wrong, whether it is done by the government or individual citizens. Do you recall if Congressman Torres accepted this principle?
Do individual citizens have the right to initiate physical force against other individual citizens that haven't initiated force or violated anybody's rights?
Other citizens, other individuals have to act according to their moralistic, their religious, and their other positions. I don't know why you asked me the question.
Individual citizens have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that have not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody, haven't violated anybody's rights, and are in their sound mind. Is that what you think?
Congressman Elliot Engel doesn't have a principle that permits him to distinguish when you should pass a law and when you shouldn't. In fact, he doesn't even think a principle would be helpful.
What I was asking you was what action should be considered a crime. Your personal view, do you have a principle that permits us to distinguish those actions that should be considered a crime from those that should not? So precisely we could evaluate legislation, either proposed or already on the books, and say this should not be a crime because it doesn't conform to this principle.
I don't have any hard and fast principles about what should be a crime and what shouldn't be a crime.
If you don't have a principle, how do you know which actions should be prohibited and which should not?
Well, I don't think it's up for me personally to decide. Again, I think there are laws that are passed.
So don't you have to vote, and you're a legislator and you have to make these decisions? Wouldn't it be useful for you to have a principle that permitted you to differentiate those actions that should be considered a crime from those that should not?
No.
This is not the America that I love. The America that I love is based on the right principles and the integrity to follow them.
Unfortunately, our journalists don't ask them the right questions and can't scrutinize our politicians' thinking effectively because they are as confused as the politicians.
If you concluded that somebody had bad character because they were black, would that be racism?
You know what? I'm not going to do this.
You don't like the question?
No, this is...
Well, let me just ask you some other question, and I don't see what is the...
I think it's just better that I not do this.
What, didn't you say it was good to have a rational discussion on the subject?
Thank you.
But why is it that you won't answer the questions? What, is there something wrong with the question I asked you?
No, you're...
I just would like to know what you think on the subject. Take it easy. It's not how will it harm you?
They are also unwilling or unable to answer simple questions.
I think I should probably leave. I don't think this is going to work.
Well, I'll ask you about something else then.
I'm much too constrained. I'm sorry.
They evade questions and run away. They contradict themselves, and worse, they think two contradictory propositions can both be true. They think something can be more than what it is. They believe in magic and use this belief in their explanations. And some even get angry and insult when required to reason.
Please turn off the camera.
Let me ask you the questions and then you answer them.
No.
Didn't you say we should do that originally?
Is that camera off?
You think it's...
Is that camera off?
Do you think that Saddam...
I'm going to break this if somebody doesn't get this off me right now.
Oh, okay, well...
We will show you all of this in detail in our next documentary. But now we need to take some time to define our predicament and suggest some solutions. First, we need journalists that can do a rigorous examination of a politician's thinking that reveals any contradictions. Secondly, we need to institutionalize real debate where people and political candidates can use the Socratic interviewing you have seen here to examine each other's premises. And finally, we need clear reasoning and principles that can serve as a proper guide to political action and proper policies.
What you think is the proper function of government should be based on your conclusions about what kind of government optimizes your opportunity for a happy life. So, let's start with the social requirements of your happiness. If you want to have the best chance of a happy, satisfied life, you need optimum protection of your life, the freedom to follow your own judgment, and keep the money that you make. In order to have the optimum protection of your life, liberty, and property, you need a social institution dedicated to fulfilling that function. You need a government. However, to the extent that the government attempts to perform additional functions, it will invariably force peaceful Americans to act against their judgment. For instance, when the government assumed the function of liberating Iraq, the people that were against the war were forced to support it financially. The more additional functions that the government assumes, the more Americans will be forced to act against their judgment. To the extent that the government gets into the habit of forcing peaceful Americans to act against their judgment, we will all suffer. All of us will be less free and have less of a possibility of a happy life, because sooner or later, we too will be forced to support a cause that we detest. Therefore, if we want to optimize our pursuit of happiness, we need a government, but one limited to defending our individual rights. These are the important truths identified by our founding fathers.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men.
The Declaration of Independence expresses the proper function of government. It says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted. It doesn't give any other reason to create a government because there is no other legitimate reason. It doesn't say we need a government to feed the hungry of the world or to free the enslaved people of the world. The government's job is to make sure that other people and foreign governments do not use force or fraud against you, so that you can pursue your own life and your own happiness free from their interference. Therefore, all governmental actions must be justified on the basis of protecting the individual rights of Americans.
Freedom is a requirement of good social living. Human beings need to be free to follow their own judgment if they are to live well. They need to be free to decide how much of their money to spend on education, on medical services, on retirement funds, on charity, and on everything else. The proper function of government is to protect the citizens' right to exercise their own independent judgment, as long as they respect the right of other people to do the same. Ironically, the government is doing just the opposite. The truth is, and the bottom line is, that your political leaders don't respect you. They don't respect your judgment about how to spend your hard-earned money. They tax you heavily, and then they decide how much of your money they're going to spend on welfare and who's going to get it, how much on corporate subsidies and which connected corporations will get it, how much on foreign aid and which countries will get it, how much on medical services and who will get them, how much on education and what kind, how much on retirement funds and whether the fund has any physical assets to guarantee payment, and so on and so forth. This lack of respect is not only morally wrong, but it also has many negative consequences. If the government is in the business of forcefully taking $2 trillion yearly from some citizens in order to provide goods and services for others, will that attract a lot of lobbyists and special interest groups that want to get their hands on other people's money? What will happen if more and more people quit their job, come to Washington, and try to get their hands on that money? I'll tell you. There's going to be less and less money to divvy up, and the fight over the money is going to become meaner and meaner until it destroys our nation. How will it affect the character of the people who are receiving the handouts?
Will it help them become independent, productive citizens? Would the special interest groups attempt to purchase political influence if all this money and privilege were not up for grabs? If the money and the privilege were not up for grabs, we would have instant campaign finance reform. I hope my questions have persuaded you that forcefully taking money from some citizens in order to provide goods and services for others is not a proper function of government, because it is morally wrong and it has many negative consequences. Are you willing to do something to protect your money, your freedom, and your nation from this misguided policy and this failure of leadership?